I mean this. I know you want it, I can see it in your eyes. So get up on it like you going for a prize. Once we get the fire started, no one survives. We gon' burn it all night.
Now we come to things like the center frequency. And for that, we need to look at another type of EQ. This is the Waves paragraphic EQ. It's a very simple EQ that I've tapped into before. It's a very helpful EQ in explaining some of the shapes that you get on the filters. Let's switch on the first band here. And let's select low pass. You can see what a dramatic drop that is. But right now what I want you to concentrate on is what happens if I go from a low pass to a low shelf. Now you can see how much more gradual the shape is to this EQ curve. Response extends from the selected frequency to the highest or lowest frequency value in the audio range. And it's gradual. Basically what that means is that if you boost by a certain value, it boosts by the same amount across the range. And that negates the aggressiveness of the low pass that we were using with the 6 dBs per octave boosts or cuts, which can be quite aggressive. Don't get me wrong, highly useful, but there are times when you use the shelf as opposed to a standard low pass or a high pass. Now this low pass shelving filter will pass all frequencies below its cutoff, but attenuates everything above its cutoff. Similarly, a high pass will do that in reverse. Now, let's select what we discussed earlier, the band pass. The band pass is also called bell, simply because it's shaped like a bell. So an EQ with a peak in its response, denoted by its shape, and quite common nowadays in just about every EQ, is the bell shape. And the bell shape has symmetrical response characteristics. In other words, it has the same response whether you're boosting or cutting. Identical. Another good thing about the bell is that the cuts and the boosts on either side of the center frequency are gradual drops or rises, depending on which way you're looking at it. Now, if I was to play with the cue here, you will see the narrowing and the widening of this. In other words, we're pushing up the Q factor and the resonance. This is narrowing the bandwidth. The higher the Q value, the narrower the bandwidth. Let's talk a little bit about parametric. Now this was invented by George Massenburg, and this filter is one of the most common used today. This filter controls 3 parameters: frequency, bandwidth, and gain. So you've got gain, frequency, and the bandwidth. You select the range of frequencies you want to boost or cut. You select the width of that range. And you use the gain or boost to cut the frequencies within this selected bandwidth. The frequencies not in the bandwidth are not altered. So we can cut whatever we want out, switch it in, not use it. If you widen the bandwidth to the limit of the upper and lower frequency ranges, then this is called shelving. Most parametric filters have shelving parameters. Parametric filters are great for complex filtering jobs and can be used to create real dynamic effects because they can attenuate or boost any range of frequencies. Basically, the parametric EQ places several active filters across the frequency spectrum. Each filter is designated to a frequency range: low, mid, high, and so on. You have the usual cut, boost, resonant frequency, and bandwidth, and it's these qualities and the control over them that places this particular EQ in the producer's arsenal of dynamic tools. Let's have a little fun here. Let's load up any of these presets. Let's go warm acoustic. That's too muffled for me. So let's change some of the frequencies. Sounds better. We've dealt with the graphic EQ. Now I'm going to load up a paragraphic EQ. Difference between the paragraphic and the graphic, well, it's just another variation on the graphic. This EQ provides control over the center frequency of each band It's also regarded as a cross between the graphic and parametric EQ. This EQ offers multiple parametric peaking filters where the gain of each is provided on a slider, much like the graphic EQ. We're now left with two additional types of EQ designs. There's minimum phase and linear phase. Minimum phase is a digital design emulation of an analog EQ whereby phase shifts or offsets are coded to mimic the analog counterpart. These phase shifts are caused by the nature of the design of the analog EQ and one of the overriding factors that determine the color or characteristic of a specific analog EQ. One of the good ones is made by Softtube again. It's called the Trident A. This is almost a like-for-like emulation of the original Trident A. And this is what we would call minimum phase. And it's very musical. If I were to play that piano piece through this, and I created a preset earlier, so let me load up that preset. And listen to this piano in bypass. Now listen to it in real time. That is so rich and just beautiful. It's so musical. I absolutely adore this plugin. And it's very rare I say that, because I'm not a real fan of VSTs, but this one is just gorgeous. Now let's talk about linear phase. Waves have linear phase EQs. In fact, a lot of the manufacturers create linear phase EQs, and there's a reason for that. Whereas with minimum phase EQs, we're trying to emulate with phase offsets. Linear phase is the opposite. So a digital system whereby no phase shifts are introduced, whether cutting or boosting, are called linear phase. So you can imagine how clinically transparent and accurate a linear phase EQ would be, and that its use would be desirable, particularly when dealing with corrective EQ, or certain mastering and mixing tasks whereby accuracy and non-coloration are important. The whole point of this tutorial has been to introduce you to the different types of EQs, how they work. Although this tutorial has been very simplistic, we will go into a lot of detail in the ensuing video tutorials. But what I wanted to get across was the difference between corrective and creative EQ. I would use this as a creative EQ because it's colored, it has its own distinct sound. Whereas I'd use a linear phase EQ for corrective. Anyway, in future tutorials, we'll go into some detailed examples using different types of EQs with different filter responses, and we'll go into a lot of detail. Hopefully this primer has helped to introduce you to the world of EQ.
I mean this. I know you want it, I can see it in your eyes. So get up on it like you going for